Hello.
Oh, that's why. So do you want me to release the slides so you can do them?
Hmm. Okay, just can barely hear you. Um,
That's this thing, right? Well, that's probably this too, right? So I can release the slides and you can run them. I just wanted to make sure they worked.
uh, yeah, they seem to work,
Come on,
and
it'll
you
be
can run.
fun.
You can run them if you want, and I'll just read.
No, it's okay. Look, there you go.
Hmm. Yeah, now I have to find how to
Oh, it's
share
just,
slides. No, I got it. I got it.
yeah, I don't think.
I'm not that technically challenged. Okay. Yeah, I
No,
think I got it.
well, no, you're not. I am, but you are not.
Well, I still couldn't figure out how to add slide numbers with the IETF template, so
Ah,
not all that great.
overrated.
Yeah. Um, wow, is that the room? Like,
It is, you can see it.
yeah.
It's not, it looks, maybe it looks bigger than it is. It's not that big. We have
So like
people.
how many people do we have there?
One, two, three, four, five, six. Six plus me.
Oh, right.
I
Okay.
said we were going to limit it to five, so I'm obviously going to have to change that.
Mhm.
I could.
So yeah. Well,
Hello? What are you
we got a
bribing
lot of
people? All the pink ones?
yeah, we
Look
got a
at
lot of people
Smarties.
in the room at least.
It's not a bribe. Yeah, he says that now.
Okay. Um, so yeah, welcome everyone to the Acme meeting of at ITF 113, uh, there in Vienna, Austria, or wherever you all are. Um, so I'm sure you've seen this thing, and this is preferential treatment for the remote users who can actually sit with the reading glasses and read this, as opposed to the people in the room who have to squint. That since this is one of the early sessions, I'll mention this is the note well. Um, please read it. Read it. Has a large bearing on what happens if you have any IPR that is relevant um, this to the contents of this meeting. Um, if you have any questions, well, there are links on the slide. You can ask your chairs, you can ask your ADs, you can ask on the mailing lists. Okay, so our agenda for today, we've got the note well, we've got technical difficulties, which are always present, whether we are local or remote, definitely when we're both at the same time, and Ms. Trivia. So do we have a Jabber scribe? Do we actually need a Jabber scribe with a hybrid meeting?
I'm more
Well,
worried about a note taker.
yeah, note taker. So anyone volunteer to be a note taker?
I'm giving my mom look to the room.
Mm.
It's not working.
Come on, we see you in the Jabber room. Somebody volunteer.
Oh, that's nice. We'll take you.
Well,
Okay,
here's
well, Aaron
here's
Gable can
Acme.
start, and then you can fill in the
Okay,
blanks,
okay,
especially
that's
when
good.
he's talking. Yeah,
Hmm.
in the Etherpad, whatever the Etherpad's called now.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna do the document status and then see then we have four presentations. And if any time is left, there's always the any other business part. Uh, okay, so document status. We've got the Acme Authority token and the Acme Authority token TN auth list. Both are in ISG evaluation, or rather have been in ISG evaluations for several months now. They have some open discusses, and both have the revised ID needed tag, and they've both had this tag for months. Anyone care to update us on the status of these two documents? Yes, Roman.
Oh, there I am. Hi. I'm basically asking kind of the same question, but I want to push it a little more. It took many months to get AD feedback resolved, and now we're seeing a bunch of months waiting for the ISG kind of feedback resolved. Is there something we can do to help? Do we need more authors or editors? I don't know how to make this go faster, but it seems like there's a lot of waiting always. That's not to you, Yo. That's to the working group.
Yeah, I gathered.
So I don't know that we have authors online. Oh, yeah, we do. Mary Burns is on.
Oh,
But John Peterson is not.
anyone? Oh, just leave. Okay, so
This weekend.
So
Okay,
Mary's
so,
on, but her audio is not working. And John has the pen, but John is not on. So Roman, maybe we need to ping John after the meeting.
Okay. Okay, so next there's the DTN node ID document. It's been submitted to the ISG, and we've got directorate reviews. There's a new version posted, and the new version is rather recent, and we're confirming the changes with the working group until April 1st. So we're encouraging you all to read this and comment soon, and that's it. So, but we're going to have a presentation about this, so let's not spend too much time of the document status part. So, Acme client, we've had, I think, no traffic on the list since the last IETF. So yeah, Kathleen, anything?
Sure, just a couple of quick comments. We should start to see traffic pick up on this because of several efforts around supply chain security and essentially tying into SBOMs and signatures for code signing signatures on software. And so either for the next meeting cycle or the one after that. And I'll be reaching out to some of the folks on Acme because SigStore, for instance, is being used, but doesn't quite match the workflow for Acme, and it would be good to have that use a standard. And so their workflow does an OpenID call first, and that information is packaged up and then is used to generate the certificate, and it's just slightly different from how Acme works. So I'm going to be reaching out to a few people to see if we can collaborate and determine the best path forward, because I think SigStore could be further secured by using Acme. And then there's one other effort that I don't think I can mention the name of yet. So there should be some pretty big efforts that will likely tap into this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so another thing that is not a working document, but we have looking at it since last IETF is the Acme renewal information. There have been some threads into this, and having more than one thread for Acme document is pretty good at this time. No new revision since last IETF, but we are having a presentation later, so let's wait for that. Okay, so Acme integrations and Acme subdomains. There's both had new versions, one in December, one in March, and both of them seem like they have synchronized slides or asking us if we're ready for working with last call, so kind of foreshadowing their presentations. So that's it for document status. Anything we've forgotten? Any agenda bashing? No. Okay,
Well,
so
the only thing is when you're in the room, you have to go to the mic, you have to join the Meet Echo mic queue. Raise your hand on
Right.
the Meet Echo mic.
okay. So next thing is DTN node ID. Yeah, Brian, I'll see how I get to release this share screen. Yeah. Or do you want us to share the?
Brian, do you want to do the slides? We can probably.
If you can bring them up, then I can flip through them.
Oh.
Is that?
Yeah, if I just managed. Oh, there's
There you
thing.
go.
Yeah, so now I'll share. No, not share screen. What I want to do is share
No, you need the little
slides.
paper thing.
Yeah,
There you go.
that's the one.
Okay, because it's really only the one slide. So if you can just flip to the next.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay. So the most recent version, -9, was published recently. One editorial change, but it is a big help, is that the DTN documents that are referenced are now actually RFCs published. So that is good. The references to those were updated. The major changes since -6, and some of these were what Roman had mentioned on the mailing list message. One of them is editorial, adding more explanation of DTN terminology and hopefully helping the reader to understand what this document is supposed to be covering and what it's not. The second change, this is structural, changing the logic for the better, is separating the tokens from the challenge identifier. And because of this separation, it avoids overlaps in how these things are used and what they mean. And it also brings this behavior into very close alignment with RFC 8823, the email validation. So the logic that applies there and here now is practically identical. The only difference being the transport of email versus DTN bundles. The one other structural change that was made in this last edit was based on some advice, future-looking advice, was rather than the 8823 method of saying that the key authorization digest is always a SHA-256, what this is doing is adding algorithm agility in the protocol to have the Acme server provide a list of what algorithms it finds acceptable and have the client choose one and use that as the key authorization digest. Now, SHA-256 is still mandatory to be present in that list, but it doesn't have to be the highest priority, and it doesn't have to be the only element. And then the last three changes were typos and some editorial comments. So the one known issue, as far as the document is concerned, and this is not strictly an issue, is just that the hash algorithms registry that this is referencing is not a published RFC yet. It's still in auth 48, but it is going through the last stages of getting that out. And it is part of the cozy discussion at a co-timed meeting with this Acme. But as Roman had mentioned, there's two changes of separating the tokens and IDs and adding the algorithm agility are changes to the logic, but not changes to the overall workflow or the goals.
So can we get some people to volunteer to review? Don't all jump at once. Thank you, Alexi.
I like how changing must not to must is an editorial change.
Well, it originally was must and then got typoed into.
Must not.
Or the other way around. It was undoing a bad typo earlier.
Yeah.
right, so if we can get a couple people to review and say it's okay.
Okay, and as always, we'll take it to the list to get
Exactly.
more volunteers. Okay, well, anything else? Any comments, screams and groans, moans and niggles? Okay, so thank you, Brian. Um, on to the next. Yeah, Aaron.
All right. Hello, everyone. It is 5 a.m. on the west coast of the United States. So any typos in these slides, I'm going to blame on it being 5 a.m. right now and not regardless of what time I actually made them.
Do you want to
Uh,
control your own slides, or do you want to let Yoav change slides for you?
oh, doesn't matter in the slightest to me.
Yeah, so I'll keep doing this.
Sure. Next slide.
Yeah.
New version 02 has not yet been published. I am still new to figuring out how all this works, and I didn't realize there was like a publication freeze right before the meeting. So there are some changes in the pipeline coming up, but they will be published as draft 02 shortly after IETF 113 is over. Going to go over what those changes are in detail, but basically updated URL construction as a result of feedback on the list, a new renewal complete endpoint that we'll talk about a little bit, and then just a bunch of small edits, cleaning up references and dates and things like that. Next slide. So this part is the same. URL construction is still based on a base path contained in the directory, this new renewal info key that points at an endpoint. Next slide. But rather than constructing the path after that endpoint as a series of / delimited path elements, each based on different aspects of the certificate, we're just cribbing wholesale from OCSP and taking the cert ID ASN1 sequence from an OCSP request, which contains the certificate serial number, hashes of its issuer name and issuer key, and for algorithm agility, the hash algorithm used to hash the issuer name and the issuer key. The full OCSP request wrapped around this has a bunch of things that we don't really need, in particular, things like the ability to request multiple OCSP responses at the same time, or OCSP extensions and OCSP individual entry extensions. We don't want any of those things, so we're going with just this cert ID component. But similar to how the Acme spec currently does things like passing certificates back and forth. Like when you fetch a certificate, that's a bunch of base 64 URL encoded data that gets returned by the server. We're doing the same thing here. You have this dir object. You have this ASN1 object, you encode it as dir, you encode that as base 64 URL, and that's the format that you use on the network to pass things back and forth. So we encode this whole thing as base 64 URL, strip any padding equals signs from the end, just like you do in other parts of Acme, and that is the path component. And then you make a GET request to the renewal info endpoint / that giant blob. Next slide. I felt like having a fun diagram here. This is basically just all of the components that are necessary to construct this request. If your client can construct an OCSP request, then your client can construct a RE request. It's exactly the same pieces of data going into it, just with fewer layers of wrapping around the outside. But you have a CA cert, you have the end entity cert, you have a hash algorithm, you construct this object, base 64 URL it, and that's how you build the URL. Next slide. Yeah, so you concatenate that. Here I've split that base64 URL into multiple lines for the sake of readability, but you just concatenate the base URL slash the base64 URL path component, make a GET request, and all the rest of this is the same as in version 0.1. The server response is identical, same status codes, same retry after, etc. So no changes in the rest of it there. Next slide. We're adding a second utility to this document. It's still part of the renewal endpoint, renewal info endpoint, but in addition to having this get functionality just to get the suggested renewal window for your certificate, we're also adding the ability to do a post as get request to the same endpoint to update the renewal state of the certificate. So basically the idea is if you are polling the renewal info URL or the renewal info endpoint to determine when it is best to renew your certificate, and then you get a response that says, hey, renew sometime in the next 6 hours, and you do your random number generation to determine when in that 6-hour window you should renew, and you do the renewal, then you can let the Acme server know, hey, from my perspective, this certificate has been renewed and replaced. This lets the server do a bunch of, first, the way you do this is bog standard Acme. You make a post as get request to the renewal info URL in the directory. The body of that post as get request is formatted exactly the same way. We've got the protected section with the key ID, the nonce, the URL that you're making the request to for the sake of replay protection. You've got the signature, and the payload is that same exact cert ID from the GET request encoded in exactly the same way, which is the same way that you make a revocation request to Acme. It's the base64 URL of the dir of the whole certificate body for a revocation request. Here it's base64 URL of dir of the cert ID, and a little bit of metadata. Right now, the only metadata is this kind of redundant seeming replaced true thing, but we can imagine other kinds of metadata, and that's part of the open questions at the end here. So you make this update request, and then the server can use this information for a bunch of things. In particular, yeah, go on to the next slide. Right, so one thing here is obviously this request must be signed by the original subscriber's key. For revocation, there's like 3 different kinds of revocation paths. It can be signed by the original subscriber's key, it can be signed by the key of a subscriber who has proven control of all of the names in the certificate, or it can be signed by the certificate key itself. Here, no, just the subscriber's key. There's no reason for anyone else to update this. That's added complication. We can talk about that. Maybe there's other reasons for it, but for now, we're saying just the original subscriber's key. And then the server can use this information for a variety of things, including not sending reminders like saying, hey, your certificate is about to expire, make sure you renew. If you have a positive confirmation that it's already been renewed and replaced, don't bother doing that. If someone keeps polling for renewal info after a cert has already been marked as replaced, just start returning empty bodies or errors, because the cert doesn't need to be renewed anymore. Its renewal information is don't. And in sort of the most emergency case, if a CA is in the process of revoking and replacing a bunch of certs, having a positive confirmation that this cert has been replaced already can let the CA revoke it knowing that it is completely safe to do so, as opposed to potentially causing operational problems for the subscriber. So those are some of the benefits of having this new endpoint. Yeah, I only have one slide left, but it looks like we have a question from Michael before I go on to open questions.
Michael Richardson at the mic. So the question, you said something that if the certificate has already been replaced, that you could just replace to return an empty body because it doesn't need to be replaced. And I'm thinking about the situation where you have some monitoring system that's monitoring things, and I'm thinking that it might actually like to know what certificate replaced it. Does that make sense? And so I'm thinking empty body might not really be the right answer there. Or maybe it's may.
Yeah, we've been thinking exactly the same thing. And Yov, if you actually go on to the next slide.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so one of the open questions that I've been thinking about is like, what other metadata might we want in this certificate renewed update? And one of the ideas we've had is the serial of the replacement cert, or perhaps even the full cert ID of the replacement cert. And that would let us do exactly that sort of thing. Oh, it's been replaced by this cert? Great, we can provide that information. In general, the mapping of one cert to its replacement is a very hard problem. Speaking from Let's Encrypt's experience, lots of large integrators do things like issue 100 certs for 100 names each based on which domains are behind which load balancers. And then 3 months later, when they come back and renew all of their certs, those names are completely shuffled between the certs. And so mapping, oh, this cert is a replacement to that one is very difficult because they have totally different sets of names. And so, yeah, it would sort of push that mapping onto the client to say, hey, you not only tell us when you have satisfactorily replaced this cert, but you tell us what you believe actually replaced it. So yeah, this is one of the things we're thinking about. We don't know the answer here yet, whether this is sufficiently valuable to justify the extra bytes on the wire, but maybe it is. Yeah, so that's one of the big open questions still. Another open question is related to one of the email threads that is on the Acme mailing list, this explanation URI. It's not a big open question. I'm pretty sure I want to include this. There hasn't been a whole lot of discussion about it. Basically, the idea is, hey, let's recognize that Acme clients are not the only client in the ecosystem. There are other players in the ecosystem, such as certificate monitoring systems, who have their own customer base of people who want to know, oh my goodness, my certificate hasn't been renewed. I don't have good monitoring on my Acme client, but I do have this service that pings my domain name every 24 hours and lets me know if my certificate is too close to expiration. And so certificate monitoring services could do things like, could provide additional value, essentially, if they had additional information about why a certificate has a particular renewal window. And in the normal case, this is just going to be, your certificate has this renewal window because that's a safe number of days before it's going to expire. But sometimes it might be, your certificate has this renewal window because our CA does dynamic load balancing, and it was determined that your certificate should be renewed a little bit earlier or a little bit later to avoid this midnight traffic spike. Or sometimes it's, your certificate was part of a mass revocation event and should be renewed early so that you don't have operational difficulties when your certificate gets revoked in 48 hours. So yeah, there's sort of this idea that the response, the renewal info response, could contain a URL pointing at a web document that describes the current reasoning behind the renewal window, and that URL could be blank most of the time, but set in certain circumstances when it might be useful to the user and to clients that are more interactive than the average Acme client, clients like certificate monitoring systems. So yeah, those are the things that we're still thinking about right now. Plan to publish version 2 in like a week and a half after this whole week of meetings is over. Yeah, any other questions, comments, things like that?
Yeah, you could do it right now if you wanted.
I'm treating the whole document like any other code project, getting code reviews from various other contributors and stuff like that. And so all of the changes I discussed today are currently in that code review stage. So getting like minor editorial feedback on them.
Okay, so since the mic queue is still empty, I'll ask my 2 questions. So one, regarding the explanation URI, are you planning to also standardize the content of that resource?
The idea is no. I'm happy to talk about other reasons, but the idea is basically like, this is something that is actually intended for the human, not for mechanical systems to process. The URL is intended for mechanical systems to send in an email or whatever, but then the contents of that page should just be a page that can run JavaScript in order to determine what locale it should translate the page into and all that sort of stuff. So the idea is that it would just be a web page.
I see. Okay. So no cozy object or anything, just plain natural language.
Happy to take suggestions, but not at this time.
Okay, so that was my participant question. Now my chair question is, so why you bring this here? Do you plan on asking for this to be adopted as a working group document?
I would love for this to be adopted as a working group document. Again, I don't really know the process behind that or when it's appropriate to ask, but yeah.
Well, it's always appropriate, and the process is asking us. Then we ask the group and give people 2 or 3 weeks to comment on whether it's a good or not a good idea, and then if they all agree, then we ask you the serious questions. Do you know that you're giving up change control? Because the group has change control. And then if you say yes, then yeah, we adopt it. And, well, we just make sure with the ADs that it's within our scope, but I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Then yeah, I would love to put out the call for adoption.
Okay, so we'll do that after the IETF week, because asking people for comments right now is like, no, they're concerned about the session tomorrow. Yeah. Better when they get back home or to work.
So once he publishes the update, we could ask for review of the update and whether it should be a working group draft. We could probably do that at the same time, right? 2 birds, 1 stone.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so any other questions, comments? Okay. Right. None of that, so I'll see if I manage to find the button that replaces the deck rather than closing the deck and opening another one. Yeah, I think I did. So time for Acme integrations.
I like this. I'm here and you run this.
Ooh, live. Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
Ready.
Okay. Well, this is Rafat here. Happy to be here in person finally. So, unfortunately, Owen is not here, so I'm gonna be talking about this on behalf of the team here. Next slide, please. So, since the version 5, we did mainly editorial changes, so aligned with the DNS terminology, uh, added some missing terminology acronyms, and just again using proper terminology all over the document just to be consistent. So that's what we did in that version. Next slide. Some minor editorial stuff still in the next version, but otherwise we are as authors think this document's ready, and we should be going to a work group last call on this one. Yeah, that's what we're asking right now. So we want to get the thoughts of the chairs and the work group on this. Any comments, questions?
Yes, Michael.
Nope. Changed his mind.
Already done. Anyone else?
No? Maybe we're good for work group last call then?
Yeah, so publish 07 and then um, we'll probably start working with last call.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we're making good time today. So last presentation is the Acme subdomains.
I've heard if you give me presentation control, I can do it from my phone now. That's what I heard. I don't know if it really is true. You have to click on my name, and it's the third icon to the way that the pop-up.
If I could only see
You have
your
to try
name
all the technology
here.
on the first day.
You're not at the top because you're not
All the
in
new
queue.
features, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just to find your name.
To find my name, and then you hover, and then you go to the far right of the, not my profile page. You don't want to chat with me.
For some reason, I'm not even
Third
seeing your
button.
name anywhere.
Third button.
He's all the
Oh,
way
never
down there.
mind.
It's probably under R.
We'll figure
or
it out.
M.
It's probably under R. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the Acme subdomains document, which was adopted, I think, just
wait,
before
I
the.
can do it. Hold on.
Pardon me? What?
I can do it. I did it.
You can do it?
Yeah.
Oh?
Look at that. Watch
Oh.
out. Oh, all slots for requested media are already taken. What does that
I don't know.
mean?
All right. Well, Yoav will just do next slide when I ask him to. That's the even higher tech version.
Yeah.
I have an AI,
Make-
and
makes me feel
an Israeli
useful.
AI that will actually change the slides for me. There's no evidence he's a real person. Anyway, okay, so the document was actually adopted, I think, just before the last IETF. We split the document out of integrations, and so we had to do a bunch of work on it to make it, flesh it out as a real document. It was adopted. Next slide, please. Yes. Again, like the previous document, we fixed a bunch of the terminology to be more correctly Acme, and there was some other terms in there that were a little bit, certificate authority, certification authority, things like that were fixed. And kind of the most interesting part is that there was some criticism of that some of the JSON content for some of the order parts were a bit confusing. They're a little bit contrived, and so we fixed that based upon some thing. And there's some text there to fix to clarify the examples. Next slide, please. So there's the example. We had this domain namespace, which kind of made sense at the time, but further reading it, just subdomains is true or not. This is when you're asking for an authorization about whether you want to do everything below it or not. And again, the same thing, domain namespace true because it became subdomain. Just to make it really clear, there's not really a lot of, it's pretty obvious, I think, how to do subdomains. Just to write it down, and everyone has to agree, and that's really about it. And next slide, I think that's the last one. Rifat and I both live in Ottawa, but we only talk when we're here at an IETF meeting. And Owen is 12 hours ahead of us, so it's a real challenge. So we think this document is probably also ready for working group last call. It obviously hasn't has much time in the working group as a document, but really you've seen it from the very beginning there. It would make sense to me to, read them all together there. Um, and I'll just mention that there is a document in LAMPS that is now referenced by the previous document that will get into RFC editor Q misref, but that's not our fault. We should finish up our work here. That's about it. Thank you. Any questions? Anyone read the document? Oh,
Behind
good.
you.
Over
I
there.
have.
Over there. Thank you. Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our slides, and I guess the same thing is true that, yeah, submit 03 and then we'll do the working group last call. Probably do them together. They're quite connected to each other. Okay, so now let's get back to the share slides, and then I have to go all the way here, right. So we got to the any other business part with plenty of time. Can just mention that assuming those working group last calls finish successfully, we'll be totally out of work unless we also adopt ARI. So depending on how that turns out, we might not have any more content. So we'll see by next IETF whether ARI is adopted and whether clients actually has content for us. All right, anybody else has anything to say on any other business? Going once, going twice. Oh, so thank you all for participating in the first ever hybrid Acme meeting. Hope it was useful and rewarding. So, and hopefully I'll be able to see you in person in Philadelphia.
Yay.
So thank you all. And bye.
Did you? No pink wall. Thank you. I'll give you back 15 minutes. I don't know. I was going to take my mask off, but Roman made me put it back on. So it's a rule. It's a rule.
Yeah, they want ideally even the chairs.
I probably should not say that in front of the microphone, but it's a rule.
Yeah, the microphones stay open. It's something to know at all ITF meetings that the microphones are basically open all day. And you can hear all sorts of things that you can hear around the room after. You know,
Like me complaining
people
about
walk
wearing
up
a
to
mask.
chairs to talk about, that. Yeah, don't have a company private conversation in the room. It serves the private.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you let them take your mask off, they're going to cover on the mic so that they can take it off between sections.
Yes.
I don't.
They did that at MWC where they
I can see that.
covered on the mic.
I don't know if that's why they told us we needed to wear them, but
I think that in the end, the whole surface transmission stuff turned out to be
sit
A
on
lot of
it.
the stuff, people said, oh, the elevator's full of COVID, and then there's some later evidence that said, yes, it's full of dead pieces, but a lot of the early tests couldn't distinguish between viable virus and just pieces of it that were remaining, right? So. So that's the whole advantage, you see, you can do a horse thing, right? Just put them in. That's why Smarties or whatever are good, you know, for.
Well, Aaron did most of it, and when I was taking it, it was not possible, so, but he did excellent work, so. As in, thank you.
Jessica was online and said, you got good people taking notes, I'm gonna do something else.
Yeah.